But he was a little bit, people have said, some historians have said, it's a bit of armchair psychology, he was a little bit insecure in his power, despite how massive it was. Because we might call it an empire, but it was very, very loose. It's not really right to call it an empire. They're very, very loose things.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a feudal domain, it's much more nuanced than an empire, frankly. This is one of the critiques that Western political philosophers would level against the Turks. They genuinely had an empire where the entire thing was centralized in the Sultan, and the Sultan would put satraps, or whatever they called them, in various areas, and they were completely beholden to him, and the entire army was beholden to the Sultan. So this takes on the aspect of a proper empire, and they called that a tyranny because it looked tyrannical. Whereas in feudal Europe, it was very much a patchwork of local loyalties bound up by feudal oaths, religious oaths, to ultimately the king at the top. And so Henry has claim to lots and lots of obligation from these people, but they could at any time say, I'm breaking this oath for whatever reason, and I have my own men, I have my own army, I have my own money, and now it's a big war. Literally the right of feud. So to call it an empire, it's not accurate, but you see what people are trying to say. It's saying political influence. There's a kind of political faction,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but like the lords of the border countries, or in lowland Scotland, and the magnates of the Aquitaine. It's not like they all see Rem or London as like the capital of their empire. It wasn't like that.
And exercising authority over like these people was probably a massive nightmare, to be honest.
It was. Yeah. It definitely was.
Because a lot of things couldn't just be done by like fiat. It'd have to have been done by persuasion. And so, anyway, not a proper empire.
So where Henry II was born to be a Count of Anjou, and then through his mother claims England, fights for it, wins it, marries Eleanor of Aquitaine. Then on top of that, he's quite successful in war in the early part of his life as well. Gets a bit lucky. At different points in time, it's more or less easy to win victories, right? For example, maybe Alexander had a relatively easy go of it just when he was born. Maybe the original Muslim invasion spreading out from Arabia had a relatively easy time of it because the world was at a weak ebb.
We know that they definitely did.
Right. Seems like Henry II benefited from that, so he sort of invaded Brittany, invaded big parts of Wales. Like I say, there was loads of unrest around Leinster in Ireland. He was able to sort of effectively take advantage of it. Where the Scots had come all the way down into northern England, they were sort of at a weak ebb, and he was able to take advantage of that. So he's born at the right time, the right place, like massively. And so it looked like, it was the case that he was sort of born to have this sort of amazing run of luck in all sorts of ways.
Because one thing about Henry, I never viewed him as any kind of genius in this regard, right? I mean, he wins victories, but they're not spectacular victories. They're not like, Hannibal or Alexander or Napoleon.
Right. Okay, that's what you're saying.
Like you say, he's born at a good time and place, and he's capable of the job. He's sufficient for the job, but, he's not one of these men who's setting the world on fire, in my view.
I see what you're saying, yeah. He never went on crusade, old Henry II. He never launched a giant war against Frederick Barbarossa, the other most powerful man in Europe. The two most powerful men in Europe easily are Henry Plantagenet, Henry II, and Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, or the guy that is sort of, there's no such thing as Germany, but there's loads and loads of German states, and he sort of controls a lot of those.
He's the emperor of it.
Yeah. And there's an anti-pope at this point. There's the Pope, Alexander III, but there are anti-popes, Victor the Fourth
in France or something.
In Frederick Barbarossa's land, Frederick Barbarossa doesn't like Alexander III. So the Pope, Alexander III, this will come up in a bit later, and Frederick Barbarossa are absolutely at odds with each other. Frederick Barbossa's like, no, I don't like you, Alexander III. I picked this other guy. He's the real Pope now. And Rome is sort of like, well, wait, we don't accept that. Are we going to have another schism, a schism within a schism now? Because the great schism between East and West had already happened. Yeah.
The schism's all the way down.
Yeah, we're just going to keep schisming here. So, okay, let's start on Thomas Becket's life.
Yes.
Because what Henry II wanted is someone to be his Chancellor and his Archbishop, who he could just completely control, who could just absolutely be his puppet, be his man. That's what he's after. And so he thinks he hopes he'll get it in Becket.
Why don't I hire a commoner for the job?
Yeah.
He'll surely not have loads of connections and be a real pain in my rear.
Not have the sort of chutzpah to go his own way, be his own man. So
Thomas, just the thing, like you could class differentials are important in this era, and you can see how Henry, who his whole life is born to rule and knows he's going to rule, even if he's not directly the son of a king. I mean, you can't have the level of aristocratic lineage that he has and not expect to rule something. And Thomas Becket, a plebeian, a peasant, just whose father does peasant things. There's no question. There's no contest. You're Henry. You don't even think about it. You think, well, obviously.
Yeah.
He's a peasant.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally have thousands of knights. I literally have a giant empire that stretches the length of Europe. What do you want?
Just to try and set the tone on how sort of low-born Becket was. He was low-born, absolutely, in terms of just sort of blood.
Yeah.
Like how blue-blooded he was.
But
his family had some money. They weren't poor.
Sure.
They weren't peasants. Like I say, his father was a merchant to the point where they had more than one home, but not much more than that. He wasn't fabulously rich.
Yeah.
But he was rich enough, and he was their only son, to send him to sort of quite a good school. Even then, they had sort of kind of the equivalent of a grammar school, or they were all sort of church schools. Back then in the 12th century, nearly all education was just church education. That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
So they had just enough money, just to cut ahead slightly, a few years ahead, to give you an idea of maybe their station, the Beckets. His father sort of comes upon hard times. There's a fire in London, not the Great Fire of London. There's been quite a few fires in London. And Becket's father's houses, I think even his warehouses burned down. He sort of loses nearly all his money. And he has to go to work for another big merchant house in London.
Right.
So they were kind of rich-ish, but not completely independently wealthy.
I mean, what we call middle class now, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's a complete anachronism, but yeah, absolutely, something like that. Something.
That's why I say what we would call now.
Yeah,
they didn't have that then,
like
but it does go to show that I argue with Americans, Adam and Sitch, a lot about feudalism in Europe and especially in England, because they don't seem to understand that the peasants were free. As in they were free to gather their own wealth, to maintain their own property, and to enlarge their own possessions. And Thomas Becket's father is a good example of that.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend exactly where and when you're saying that. So sort of after the Black Death, which is way after this, because the Black Death in Britain is 1348 to 49, when a lot of serfdom is done away with at that point. But still, they weren't slaves.
And that's exactly. And that's the thing. The Americans just can't understand. Well, how does a medieval peasant earn money? Well, however he likes. I mean, a lot of the time your options will be limited. So it'll be practical to work on the land, or it'll be practical to be a merchant or something. But you can do well out of these things. You can make money. You can buy 2 homes. You can send your children to private schools. It doesn't mean that you're just eating dirt all the time. It's a lot more complicated.
I don't know why you argue with Adam and Sitch.
I like Adam and Sitch. They're just American liberals.
Yeah, unlettered.
That's fair. Unlettered is fair. But they are.
Could I be more condescending? Unread.
On these subjects, that is true.
Okay, so Becket's early life then, he does go to quite a good school, and from there, though, he does have to work. They're not independently wealthy, and it seems that, what he eventually gets at some point, he works for one of the big merchant houses, one of the big guilds in London. He eventually gets a position when he's in his sort of mid-20s in the household of the Archbishop of Canterbury, a Theobald. And now we don't have a fantastic amount of detail that a modern historian would really like about how the next few years happen. But all you can certainly infer, that he's just really capable, really charismatic, because Theobald quite quickly raises him very high, starts giving him positions within the ecclesiastical hierarchy, starts making him sort of under deacons of various churches around the place, starts giving him administration roles, sends him on an embassy to Rome.
I can't help but feel that when you're surrounded by people who often are not educated and may not be the smartest tools in the box, that when you get this well-educated, quite bright chap come along and say, yeah, I can do that. Brilliant. That, and that, and that. I need all this done. I can completely see how this would unlock doors, open doors for Thomas Becket.
I think it's fair to describe him as a fixer. You've got a task. You've got a project. You need a capable project manager.
Yeah.
Oh, him. He gets things done.
Yeah.
He just gets things done.
Oh, he's smart, educated, literate.
That will take you a long way in life, and always has.
Yeah.
Right.
But especially now,
yeah.
when, when more than half the population has been to university, it's less of an important thing. But back then, this guy's pretty unique.
Just before he sort of starts doing that sort of thing, like going on embassy to Rome on behalf of the Archbishop of Canterbury, I must say, Theobald even sends him to Paris to do some more learning, some more book learning. He goes to Bologna at one point, I believe, to the university there. And he's often described as worldly and not a great scholar, although he was scholarly on some level. He was certainly educated, obviously completely literate. But he wasn't sort of a great Latinist. He wasn't considered, one of the leading lights of scholasticism or anything.
No.
So, like later, there were lots of letters that survive, and historians look back on. They say he Becket must have dictated that. He wasn't that good a writer. However, you couldn't say he was stupid. You couldn't say he was uneducated or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it seems through the next few years, he is sort of a fairly meteoric rise, because by the time he's in his early 30s, he holds lots and lots and lots of offices in the state. He's sort of he's one of the most important people in the structure of power at Canterbury. He's like one of the deacons of Canterbury, which is very, very powerful. And a man in his sort of early 30s, mid 30s, it just speaks of he's been singled out.
And I think it's important to emphasize the power of the church at this time as well. Because when we say deacon, people think, oh, it's just some guy in a robe who has no claim on me whatsoever. That certainly was not the case in 12th century England. The church was a massive, powerful institution that was responsible for, like you said, education, but it was also responsible for alms, for feeding the poor, for the destitute. In all matters spiritual, the church was the authority, and people viewed religion in the same way that we view science. And so people would take the dictates of the priests to be the same way that we take it on faith that the planets are round and they circle around the sun, and and gravity operates, and electrons and all these things. They view religion in exactly the same way. And so this gives the church the sort of power that science has now, so just to make, because this, honestly, moderns just do not understand the influence that the church wielded in the ancient world, because it just doesn't in the modern world.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. They barely had a state as we know it. Most of the machinery of the state, if you can't really call it that, but it's
very primitive.
Yeah, and lots of it is based around the church and ecclesiastical sort of frameworks. Like the See of Canterbury or the See of York. They're sort of they're a legal and spiritual authority. The main one, other than the crown itself.
Yeah. And all of these things are underpinned by God Almighty.
Of course, there's no sort of welfare state or anything like that. There's no like police.
No.
Right?
No.
There's hardly anything.
Yeah.
Really. Like all education, there's not really any hospitals as we know them.
No. Again,
anything
all of this
like that,
is done by the church.
It's all done by the church.
Yeah.
It's all done by the church.
It's such an important social and political institution that to say Thomas Becket has risen from nothing to become a deacon of Canterbury, we are, I mean,
it's impressive, right?
Yeah.
It says he had an amazing character.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a modern, it's like him being like the president of like Oxford University or something, the modern era. This he's come out of nowhere. He's in his early 30s and he's in charge of one of the most prestigious institutions in the entire country, recognized across Christendom. So it's no small thing is what we're trying to emphasize here.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.